Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I started teaching at Roosevelt High right after college. It wasn't the fanciest school, but the kids were good, and the science department was decent. I also coached wrestling and football, which meant I knew which students could handle responsibility when things got tough. That knowledge would prove important on the worst day of my teaching career. It was a Tuesday morning in March. I was in my chemistry classroom getting ready for second period when I heard this loud hissing sound. Water was shooting out from under the sink at the front of the room like a geyser. The water main had burst and water was spraying everywhere. The first thing I noticed was that the floor drain in the corner was completely clogged with debris. Paper, pencil shavings, and God knows what else had built up over time. The water had nowhere to go and was starting to pool rapidly across the entire classroom floor. I knew I had to act fast. When my students started filing in, I made a quick decision. I told everyone to listen up because we had a water emergency. I sent most of them to the library to wait for further instructions. The majority of my students grabbed their bags and headed out. But I kept back 5 of my wrestlers and football players, kids I knew could handle a crisis without panicking. I told them to stay because we needed to get the water out before it spread to the hallway. We grabbed every trash can we could find and started bailing water, dumping it out the windows that faced the courtyard. Meanwhile, I called the main office and asked them to send someone from building and grounds immediately. The kids worked like champions. We had a decent system going. Some were filling trash cans, others were carrying them to the windows, and we were actually making progress. The water level had stopped rising at least. About 10 minutes later, this maintenance guy I'd never seen before burst through my classroom door. He was a big guy with a permanent scowl, and he immediately started yelling. He demanded to know what the hell I thought I was doing. I explained that we were trying to get the water out before it flooded the hallway because the drain was clogged. He cut me off and said he didn't care what I thought I knew, claiming I was making everything worse. I tried to explain that we needed to keep bailing because if the water reached the hallway, we'd have a bigger problem. He screamed at everyone to get out and told me I didn't know what I was talking about because this wasn't my job. He was getting red in the face, jabbing his finger at me like I was some incompetent child. I told him I understood he knew maintenance, but pointed out that the drain was clearly blocked and we could see it wasn't draining. He insisted that the water pressure would clear the blockage, claiming that's how these systems work. He said we needed to let the water build up until there was enough pressure to force the clog through. I stared at him. This made no sense to me, but he was screaming now and my students were looking scared. He yelled at everyone to get out and told me to stop interfering with his work. He bragged that he'd been doing this for 15 years and didn't need some teacher telling him how to do his job. My student athletes looked at me uncertainly. I asked if he was absolutely sure about this approach because if the water got into the hallway, we'd have a major disaster on our hands. He screamed at us to get out and threatened to call the principal if he saw any of us back in the classroom. Against my better judgment, I led my students out. When we left, I could see the water level was already rising again without us bailing it out. 2 hours later, the inevitable happened. Water came pouring out of my classroom and into the main hallway. But it didn't stop there. It flowed down the hallway in both directions, seeped through the floor, and flooded the entire level below us. By the end of the day, over 40 classrooms were underwater. The damage was catastrophic. Within a week, they had to shut down nearly half the school due to water damage and the mold that started growing immediately. There simply wasn't enough classroom space for all our students. The district made the unprecedented decision to split our student body in half. Group A attended school from 5 a.m. to 11 a.m. Group B attended from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. It was a nightmare for everyone: students, teachers, parents, and bus drivers. All spring sports were canceled that year. The following year, even fall sports had to be canceled because the gymnasium and athletic facilities were still being repaired. The final repair bill, over $15 million. Our small district had never faced anything like this. Programs were cut, teachers were laid off, and class sizes ballooned. And me? 3 days after the flood, I was called into a meeting with my supervisor, the vice principal, and the school principal. The principal told me that this disaster could have been prevented if I had followed proper procedures. I asked what procedures they meant, explaining that I had called building and grounds immediately and tried to prevent the flooding. The vice principal said I should have evacuated and waited for maintenance to handle it. I reminded them that I did evacuate when maintenance arrived, but pointed out that the drain was clearly clogged. My supervisor cut me off and said I wasn't qualified to make those assessments. She claimed my interference may have made the situation worse. They were blaming me for trying to prevent exactly what ended up happening. At the end of that school year, they didn't renew my contract. They said no explanation was needed and mentioned budget cuts due to flood damage. I found a position at another district and tried to put the whole mess behind me, but the story doesn't end there. 2 years later, I got a call from my old principal. He said they'd like to offer me my old position back. He explained that they'd realized my quick thinking could have prevented significant damage if maintenance had listened to my concerns. I asked what happened to the maintenance worker. The principal told me he was let go after an investigation showed that his approach was completely wrong. The drain needed to be unclogged, not pressurized, just like I had said. I almost left. Almost. I thanked him but said I was happy where I was now. My new district had heard about what happened at Roosevelt. When they hired me, they specifically mentioned that they valued teachers who took initiative during emergencies. I work at a tight-knit office with 10 employees, and we all share a communal kitchen area with one large fridge. Part of that means meal prepping on Sundays, making big batches of pasta, stir-fries, or casseroles that I portion out for the week. It saves me tons of money compared to eating out, and honestly, my cooking is way better than the overpriced sandwiches at the deli downstairs. Everything was fine until about a month ago. I came to the kitchen on a Tuesday to grab my leftover chicken Alfredo, and it was gone. Just gone. I figured maybe I forgot to bring it, or left it at home. But then it happened again on Thursday with my beef and broccoli. Then the following week, my homemade chili disappeared. By the fourth time, I knew someone was stealing my food. The fifth theft really got to me. I'd made this amazing shepherd's pie over the weekend. Took me hours with all the layering and getting the mashed potatoes just right. I was actually looking forward to it all morning. When lunchtime came and I opened the fridge, there was just an empty container sitting there, licked clean. Someone had eaten my entire meal and had the nerve to put the dirty container back. I decided to address it in our office group chat that afternoon. I sent a message to everyone saying that someone had been taking my lunches from the fridge, that it had happened 5 times now, and asking them to please stop. A few people sent generic replies back. One coworker said it sucked and that they were sorry. Another said that some people were the worst. My supervisor said it was really frustrating and asked everyone to please be respectful of others' food. But nobody admitted to it, and I had a feeling the thief was probably one of the people sending those fake sympathy messages. The whole thing felt so passive-aggressive and weird. After another week of bringing back up granola bars, because I couldn't trust my real lunch would be there, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I went to the electronics store and bought a small mini fridge. Nothing fancy, just big enough for a meal container and a drink. I set it up under my desk and even got a little combination lock for extra security. Problem solved. For 2 blessed weeks, I actually got to eat the food I brought. No more hunger pangs at lunch, no more wasted groceries, no more anxiety about whether my meal would be there. It was perfect. Then last Friday happened. I was sitting at my desk eating my leftover lasagna when one of my co-workers approached me. She's been here about a year and always seemed friendly enough, but I could tell she was worked up about something. She told me that my whole mini fridge thing was really weird and selfish. When I asked what she meant, she said it made me look paranoid, like I didn't trust anyone, and that it wasn't very team-oriented. I explained that someone had been stealing my lunch 5 times, so I solved the problem. She responded by saying I should have just brought stuff I wouldn't care about losing, like snacks or those microwave meals. If I was so worried about it, I stared at her, Was she seriously suggesting I should lower the quality of my meals to accommodate a thief? I told her that people could just not steal other people's food instead. She said it was just food and that I was being dramatic. She added that now I was making everyone else look bad with my little locked fridge situation. I asked how I was making anyone look bad. She said it was because now it was obvious that I thought one of them was a thief. I pointed out that someone actually was a thief, since my food didn't grow legs and walk away. She rolled her eyes and walked off, clearly annoyed that I wasn't backing down. Over the next few days, I started getting little passive-aggressive comments from various co-workers. One told me not to let him see my lunch because I might lock it up too. Another said we get it, that I'm special. Karen mentioned that some people just can't share. It was ridiculous. I was being treated like the villain for protecting my own property. The whole office dynamic felt poisoned, and I was starting to wonder if I should just give up the mini fridge to keep the peace. But then something interesting happened. Our office manager sent out an email about installing security cameras in the break room due to ongoing issues with personal property. Apparently, I wasn't the only one having problems. People's coffee creamer, sodas, and snacks were disappearing too. The cameras went up on a Wednesday. By Friday, we had our answer. The office manager called a meeting and told us they'd reviewed the footage. Karen had been caught red-handed taking food from the communal fridge multiple times over the past month. Not just my stuff, she'd been helping herself to whatever looked good. Karen looked around as everyone turned to look at her. The office manager explained that they had clear footage of her taking other people's meals, that this was theft, and it was completely unacceptable. Karen protested that the food was just sitting there and that people leave food and forget about it all the time. I said that it was her who had taken my lunch all 5 times. She insisted it wasn't a big deal and that I got my little fridge anyway. The office manager told her to pack her desk because she was terminated effective immediately. The silence in that conference room was deafening. Karen looked around desperately for support, but everyone was avoiding eye contact. She'd been caught, and all her righteous indignation about my selfishness and paranoia crumbled in an instant. When she packed her things, Karen tried one last guilt trip. She said this was so unfair and that she was going through a rough patch financially, claiming that we all knew that, but nobody was buying it anymore. If she was struggling, she could have asked for help or talked to someone. Instead, she'd chosen to steal and then had the audacity to shame me for protecting myself. After she left, several co-workers approached me to apologize. One said they were so sorry they gave me grief about the fridge and that I was right all along. Another said they felt terrible about the comments they made and that I shouldn't have had to deal with that. My supervisor even pulled me aside to tell me I handled the situation professionally and found a solution that worked. I still have my mini fridge, and now everyone respects the boundary. Some people even asked where I got it because they're considering getting their own. Turns out protecting your property isn't paranoid or selfish, it's just common sense. Karen found a new job eventually, but word travels fast in our industry. Let's just say her reputation for sharing other people's things preceded her. I'm a single dad raising 3 kids, 2 boys aged 8 and 10, and a 12-year-old girl. After my divorce 2 years ago, I scraped together every penny I could to buy this little house with a backyard pool. The divorce left me with almost nothing, and I had to work 2 jobs just to afford the down payment. It wasn't much, just a modest above-ground pool, but it meant everything to my kids. Summer vacation was coming up, and I knew they'd be spending most of their time in that pool since I couldn't afford expensive camps or vacations. The house next door had been empty for months, until this woman moved in about 3 weeks before school ended. She seemed normal at first, quiet, kept to herself. I introduced myself when she was moving in, trying to be neighborly. I walked over and welcomed her to the neighborhood. She barely looked at me, gave a short thanks, and went back to directing the movers. I figured she was just stressed from the move, so I didn't think much of it. The problem started the very first day of summer vacation. My kids were so excited to finally use the pool regularly. They'd been counting down the days. Around 10 a.m., they ran outside in their swimsuits and jumped in, laughing and splashing around like normal kids do. About 20 minutes later, I heard shouting from next door. I walked outside to see her leaning over our shared fence, pointing at my kids who were just playing in the water. She yelled that my kids needed to be quiet and that they were being too loud. She said she worked from home and needed peace and quiet. I told her they were just playing in their own backyard and it was only 10 in the morning. She said she didn't care what time it was and told me to control them or she'd call the police. I was stunned. My kids weren't screaming or being destructive, they were just having fun in the water like any normal children would. But I didn't want trouble, so I asked them to keep it down a bit. This became a daily routine. Every single day, Karen would come out and complain about the noise. She'd bang on the fence, yell over it, and even threw a few things into our yard when she was really angry. I tried talking to her multiple times, explaining that kids need to play and that we weren't violating any noise ordinances, but she wouldn't listen. The situation escalated when she started leaving nasty notes in my mailbox. The first one said my kids were disturbing the peace and threatened legal action. The second one accused me of being a terrible parent who couldn't control his children. The third one was just a list of times when my kids had been outside, like she was keeping a log of their activities. The situation got worse when she started calling the police. The officers would show up, see kids playing in a pool during the day, and basically tell her there was nothing they could do. One officer even told me privately that she'd called 6 times in 2 weeks and they were getting tired of the false complaints. Karen also called Child Protective Services, claiming I was neglecting my children by letting them play outside unsupervised. The social worker came by, saw 3 happy, healthy kids enjoying their summer, and closed the case immediately. Karen started taking pictures and videos of my kids through the fence. When I confronted her about it, she claimed she was documenting the noise violations for her lawyer. I told her to stop filming my children, but she said she had a right to record whatever she could see from her property. This made my kids uncomfortable, and my daughter started asking if they could play inside instead. She also began calling the homeowners association, even though we weren't part of one. When she found out there was no HOA to complain to, she started contacting the city about noise violations. The city inspector came out, measured the sound levels during peak playtime, and told her that children playing during daytime hours was completely within legal limits. Karen then tried to get other neighbors involved. She went door to door asking people to sign a petition about the noise from my backyard. Most neighbors politely declined, and a few even came to tell me about her bizarre behavior. The elderly couple across the street said they enjoyed hearing kids play, and that it reminded them of when their own children were young. She started turning on loud music whenever my kids went outside, claiming it was to drown out their noise. She blasted from speakers pointed directly at our yard. When I asked her to turn it down, she said she had the right to play music on her own property. The music was so loud that other neighbors complained, and she finally had to stop when the police cited her for a noise violation. Karen began throwing things over the fence into our pool. First, it was just leaves and sticks, which I assumed might have blown over naturally. Then I found cigarette butts floating in the water, even though none of us smoke. One morning, I discovered someone had dumped a bag of garbage into the pool overnight. I installed a security camera pointing at the pool area after that incident. She also started parking her car in a way that blocked half of my driveway. When I asked her to move it, she claimed she was parked legally on the street. Technically, she was right, but it made it nearly impossible for me to get my car out without scraping hers. I had to start parking on the street myself just to avoid the hassle. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a hot Tuesday in July. My kids had been in the pool for about an hour when I went inside to make lunch. I was in the kitchen when I heard my daughter screaming. Not plain screaming, but terrified screaming. I ran outside and saw fire on the surface of our pool water. Actual flames dancing on top of the water while my kids stood there crying and soaking wet on the deck. The security camera had captured everything, including Karen climbing over the fence with a container of cooking oil. My daughter was crying and told me the water had caught fire. She said they were swimming and suddenly there were flames everywhere. My youngest son had a small burn on his arm from trying to get out of the pool quickly. I immediately called 911 while trying to figure out what had happened. The fire department arrived quickly and put out the flames. The paramedics checked my kids for injuries and treated my son's burn. The fire chief explained that someone had poured a flammable liquid onto the surface of the water and then ignited it. He said this was definitely intentional and that someone had dumped what looked like cooking oil on my pool and lit it. He told me my kids were lucky they got out when they did because oil fires can spread quickly and burn much hotter than regular fires. The police arrived shortly after the fire department. I showed them the security footage, which clearly showed Karen climbing the fence, pouring oil into the pool, and then lighting it with what appeared to be a long lighter. The footage also showed her standing there for a moment, watching the flames before climbing back over the fence. I knew exactly who had done it, but now I had proof. I walked straight to Karen's front door and pounded on it, with the police officers following behind me. She opened the door and asked what I wanted now. I asked her directly if she had set my pool on fire. She said she didn't know what I was talking about. I told her my kids could have been seriously hurt and that there were flames in the water while they were swimming. She replied that maybe now I'd keep them quiet. She just admitted it so casually. The police officer stepped forward and told her they had video evidence of her committing arson. Karen's face went pale when she realized she'd been caught on camera. I asked her again if she was telling me she actually set fire to my pool. She admitted she had poured some old cooking oil in there and lit it with a barbecue lighter. She said she figured it would scare them enough to stay inside where they belong because she needed her peace and quiet, and I wouldn't listen. I told her she could have killed my children. She brushed it off, saying it was just a little fire on top of the water and asking if they weren't fine. The police officer told her that arson was a felony, especially when it endangered children. Karen started backtracking, saying it was just meant to be a harmless prank and that she never intended for anyone to get hurt. The officer told her she was under arrest for arson, reckless endangerment of minors, destruction of property, and trespassing. Karen's tune changed real quick when she saw the handcuffs. She said this was ridiculous and that it was just a little fire. She claimed she was trying to teach them a lesson and that I was the one who should be arrested for letting my kids be so loud. When they led her away, she kept yelling about how she just wanted some quiet and that I was overreacting. She screamed that she worked from home and deserved peace in her own neighborhood. The woman had literally set fire to a pool with my children in it and thought she was the victim. The case took several months to go through the court system. During this time, I had to deal with insurance companies, pool repair costs, and therapy bills for my kids. The pool damage alone cost $3,000 to fix, and my son needed treatment for his burn injury. My homeowner's insurance covered most of it, but I still had to pay a $500 deductible. Karen tried hiring a lawyer who attempted to get the charges reduced. Her legal team argued that it was a moment of poor judgment brought on by stress and sleep deprivation from the noise. They claimed she never intended to hurt anyone and that the fire was contained to just the surface of the water. The prosecutor wasn't buying any of it, especially with the clear video evidence and the fact that a child was actually injured. The security footage was played in court, showing Karen deliberately climbing the fence, pouring oil into the pool, and lighting it. You could see her watching the flames for several seconds before leaving. The defense tried to argue that she panicked and didn't know what to do, but the video clearly showed her calmly executing her plan. Several neighbors testified about Karen's escalating behavior over the summer. The elderly couple across the street talked about her going door to door with a petition. Another neighbor mentioned the loud music she'd blast whenever my kids played outside. The mail carrier even testified that Karen had intercepted mail delivery to complain about the noise from my backyard. My kids had to testify about what happened that day. My daughter explained how they were just swimming normally when suddenly the water around them caught fire. My son showed the court his burn scar and talked about how scared he was. The judge was visibly disturbed when hearing their testimony, especially when my youngest started crying while describing the incident. The prosecutor also presented evidence of all Karen's previous complaints and harassment. They had records of her numerous police calls, the Child Protective Services report, and copies of the threatening notes she'd left in my mailbox. The city inspector testified about her frivolous noise complaints and how the sound levels were well within legal limits. Karen took the stand in her own defense, which turned out to be a huge mistake. She spent most of her testimony complaining about the noise my kids made and how it affected her work. When the prosecutor asked her if she understood that she could have killed 3 children, she said she never thought the fire would spread and that it was just meant to scare them. She actually said in court that parents should control their children better and that I was just as responsible for what happened. The judge sentenced her to 3 years in prison and ordered her to pay for all the damage to my pool plus medical bills for my kids' therapy. The total restitution came to $8,500. Karen protested that it was insane and that she shouldn't go to jail for trying to get some peace in her own yard. The judge told her she had endangered the lives of 3 children with an act of arson and that she was lucky no one was killed. He also issued a permanent restraining order, meaning Karen could never contact me or my family again. She was banned from coming within 1,000 feet of our home, even after her release from prison. The judge said her escalating pattern of harassment showed she was a danger to my family. Her house went into foreclosure while she was in jail, and a lovely family with 3 kids of their own moved in. The new neighbors actually apologized for Karen's behavior, even though they had nothing to do with it. Their kids and mine are best friends now, and our backyards sound like what summer should sound like, full of laughter and splashing. Karen got out after 2 years and 4 months for good behavior, but she moved to another state. I heard she's not allowed to live within 500 feet of any family with children as part of her parole conditions. She also has to register as an arsonist in whatever state she moves to. My kids still use the pool every summer, though it took them a while to feel completely safe in the water again. My son's burn healed completely, but he still has a small scar that reminds us of that terrible day. But now they swim with their new friends next door, and it's twice as loud as it ever was before. My sister and I are complete opposites, but I love her deeply and have always supported her choices. My style reflects my personality. I have stretched ears, multiple piercings, and a small tattoo of a geometric design on my hand that I got when I finished art school. My family has always accepted me for who I am, or so I thought. She's more traditional, always concerned about appearances and what people think. I respect that about her, even if I don't understand it. A few months ago, she got engaged to her boyfriend of 3 years. He comes from what she calls old money. His family owns several businesses in Alberta, and they're very traditional. I was genuinely happy for her because she seemed excited about the future they were building together. Last month, she called me with wedding details. She told me they had decided to have the wedding in Alberta since his whole family was there, and it would be easier for everyone. She said she wanted me there, of course, but would totally understand if I didn't come since she knew I don't fly and it's a really long drive of 3 or 4 days. At the time, I didn't pick up on what she was really saying. I thought she was just being considerate about the travel distance. I told her I wouldn't miss her wedding for the world and that I'd drive up with our cousin to make a road trip out of it. There was a pause on her end before she said that sounded great and that she'd send me the invitation soon. Last Thursday, the invitation finally arrived. It was beautiful, printed on expensive paper with gold lettering. When I called to confirm my attendance, I remembered something our dad had mentioned. I asked her about coordinating colors for photos since Dad had mentioned she emailed him about a specific color suit and tie. She told me I didn't need to worry about that. When I pressed her about wanting to look appropriate for her big day, she explained that it was nothing personal, but because I have stretched ears and all my piercings, plus the tattoo on my hand, I don't really fit the aesthetic they're going for. She said if I came, we could take some pictures with just us, but I wouldn't be in the main wedding photos. I don't cry often, but tears started streaming down my face immediately. The woman, who used to braid my hair and let me sleep in her bed during thunderstorms, was telling me I wasn't good enough to be in her wedding photos. I told her if she didn't want me there, I wouldn't go. She stayed silent, so I hung up and spent the rest of the evening crying. The next day, I had lunch planned with my grandparents and uncle. I wasn't going to tell them what happened, but when they asked about the wedding plans, everything came spilling out. I explained that my sister didn't want me in the wedding photos because of how I looked. My grandmother, who is usually the most composed person I know, started crying. She said that if I wasn't welcome, then neither were they and they weren't going. My uncle agreed, saying it was ridiculous since I'm her sister. I begged them not to make this a bigger deal than it had to be because I didn't want to ruin her wedding. My grandmother said that my sister was the one ruining her own wedding by treating family like this. By the end of the weekend, word had spread through our family. My aunt and her husband declined their invitations. All four of my cousins did the same. My brother called me, furious. He asked what kind of person excludes their own sister from wedding photos and told me he wasn't going either. I told him not to do this because of me since I felt terrible enough already. He said I should feel supported, not terrible, and that this whole situation was outrageous. My parents were torn. They didn't want to miss their daughter's wedding, but they were horrified by how she treated me. By Monday, my sister was calling everyone, trying to convince them to reconsider. When she called me, she was crying. She accused me of causing half the family not to come and said I had ruined everything. I reminded her that I didn't ask anyone to do anything and had just told them what happened. She said I should have kept it to myself and that now I destroyed her wedding. I pointed out that she was the one who told her sister she wasn't good enough to be in wedding photos. She argued it wasn't about being good enough, but about the vision they had for their day. I responded that apparently her vision didn't include her only sister. She hung up on me. 2 weeks later, I got a call from my grandmother. She thought I should know that my sister had just called off the wedding. When I asked why, she explained that my sister's fiance's family had heard about the drama and how she treated me. His grandmother had called her directly and told her that any woman who would exclude her own sister from wedding photos over something so trivial wasn't the kind of person they wanted in their family. I felt a mix of emotions. My grandmother added that his grandmother had said they raised their grandson to value family above appearances, and if my sister couldn't understand that, then she wasn't right for him. A few days later, my sister called me. She was sobbing when she apologized. She said she didn't know what she was thinking and had gotten so caught up in trying to impress his family that she forgot what really matters. I told her I never wanted this to happen to her. She acknowledged that she was horrible to me and deserved everything that happened, then asked if I could ever forgive her. It took time, but we worked through it. She got help from a therapist about her issues with image and perfectionism. She realized that her ex-fiance's family valued authenticity over appearances, which is exactly what she should have been looking for in a partner. 6 months later, she met someone new at a coffee shop. He's an elementary school teacher who has never cared about status or appearances. When she introduced us, the first thing he did was compliment my tattoo and ask about the meaning behind it. I started at a manufacturing plant right out of high school when my dad got me the job through a friend of his. I work in the production area where we make industrial parts, and dust is just part of the job. The machines grind and cut metal all day, so there's always a fine layer of dust settling on everything within minutes. The pay scale here is pretty sweet. Regular time is $22 an hour, time and a half for overtime gets me $33. And holiday pay doubles everything. So when they asked for volunteers to come in on Memorial Day for cleanup duty, I jumped at the chance. $82.50 an hour to sweep and clean? Sign me up. I'd worked with most of the foremen before and they were all pretty reasonable guys who understood how the plant operated. But this Memorial Day, we had a new foreman I'd never met before. He'd been hired about 2 weeks earlier and was trying to make his mark, I guess. Let's call him Karen because that's exactly how he acted. So I showed up that Monday morning ready to work. The plant was quiet since production was shut down for the holiday. Just a skeleton crew of maintenance guys and a few of us doing deep cleaning. I grabbed my assignment sheet and saw I was supposed to sweep the main production floor, clean the break room, and organize some storage areas. I started with the production floor since it was the biggest job. I'd been sweeping for maybe 20 minutes when Karen came over. He asked me what I was doing, and I told him I was sweeping the production floor like my assignment said. He told me I wasn't doing it right and pointed out all the dust that was still there. I looked down. There was barely anything visible, just the faintest trace of dust that had probably settled in the few minutes since I'd swept that section. I explained to him that this was about as clean as it gets because dust settles constantly due to the ventilation system moving air around. Karen didn't want to hear my excuses. He told me I couldn't leave this area until there was absolutely no dust visible anywhere. I thought he was joking at first, but his face was dead serious. I tried to explain that dust was going to keep settling no matter what, cause that's just how this place works with all the metal grinding that goes on. Karen asked if I was arguing with him and repeated that no dust means no dust. He told me to figure it out and walked away. I just stood there for a minute. Anyone who'd worked here longer than a week knew that keeping the production floor completely dust-free was impossible during normal operations, and even with everything shut down, the air circulation system kept moving particles around. But hey, I was making $82.50 an hour, so if he wanted me to chase dust particles around all day, that was his call. I kept sweeping the same area over and over. Every time I'd finish a section and move on, I'd look back and see that fine layer starting to form again. After about 2 hours, I decided to test something. I swept one small section until it was spotless, then just stood there and watched. Sure enough, within 10 minutes, there was a light dusting visible again. Around lunchtime, I took my break and came back to find Karen inspecting my area. He was angry, pointing out that he could see dust everywhere. He reminded me that he'd told me not to leave until it was clean and said he didn't know how we people did things before, but he ran a tight ship. He called the situation unacceptable. I simply told him I understood and would keep working on it. The afternoon shift foreman showed up early and saw me still sweeping the same spot I've been working on all morning. He asked what I was still doing there since I was supposed to hit multiple areas that day. I explained that the new foreman had told me I couldn't leave this section until there was no dust visible. The afternoon foreman asked if I meant no dust on the production floor, and I confirmed that's what Karen had said. The afternoon foreman started laughing. He told me that if that's what Karen wanted and I was getting holiday pay, I should knock myself out. He even offered to approve overtime if I wanted to pull a double shift and keep sweeping. At this point, I was already 8 hours in and had made $660 to push a broom around the same 50 square foot area. The afternoon foreman was offering me another 8 hours at the same rate. I asked if he was serious, and he said absolutely. He explained that if the new guy wanted to pay holiday overtime for someone to sweep dust that was just going to come back, that was his budget he was blowing. So I stayed. For another 8 hours, I swept the same area over and over while Karen popped in periodically to check on me, each time getting more frustrated that there was still a light dusting visible. During one of his visits, Karen said it was ridiculous and asked how hard it could be to sweep dust. I told him I was doing my best. He said my best wasn't good enough and demanded the area be spotless. By the end of my 16-hour shift, I'd made $1,320 to sweep one small section of floor. The night shift foreman came in as I was finally packing up. He commented that it had been a long day and I agreed. He mentioned that he'd heard about my dust situation from the afternoon foreman and thought it was pretty funny. The real payoff came the next week. Apparently, the plant manager got the overtime report and saw that the company had paid over $1,300 for one employee to sweep the same area for 16 straight hours. He called Karen into his office for an explanation. Karen tried to justify it by saying I was being insubordinate and not following orders, but when the plant manager talked to the other foremen, they all confirmed that what he'd asked for was impossible. Dust was a constant in the production area, and anyone who'd worked there knew it. Karen got written up for poor resource management and wasteful spending. The plant manager made it clear that he expected foremen to understand the realities of the work environment before making demands that cost the company over $1,000 for basic cleaning tasks. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.